Can you give me any reason that they had these two beliefs simultaneously? Oh my God, there's a coup occurring that might overthrow the government, but let's not deploy the National Guard because it'll look bad for optics. Can you give me any reason? I think that I can make the case easily that there was a lot of they intentionally let it get out of hand. It was a riot that got out of hand. That's what the Democrats, the FBI wanted. They got exactly. The Democrats, the FBI, people that wanted Trump out of there, even people like Mitch McConnell, because they were able to use that to say, okay, now you're going to leave with your tail between your legs and you're not going to unclassify documents or release shit, blah, blah, blah. That's like, if you want, we can get into this debate if you want. So
well, we can schedule like a real debate on this.
I would be happy to do it. I would be happy to do it. I'll just say in general, I'll hit you up afterwards. We'll do that. But I'll just say in general, the guy that was in charge of the Capital City Police with protecting the police has a litany of reasons that he was screwed over, both leading up to January 6th when he was trying to get appropriate levels of security and on the day of January 6th, going straight to Nancy Pelosi's office.
Who was this? They said the Capitol Police. What's his name?
Sund. Stephen Sund, I believe is his name.
Well, did you saw though? I don't know if you want to go over this now. Do you saw the National Guard testimony about the delay?
The recent one?
Yeah, the one Loudermilk's commission ran, or
yes.
Not commission, but committee ran.
Yes.
Did you think anything in there was useful or interesting?
Yes.
I thought it was. I mean, it's interesting that they delayed it because they thought that the optics of having the troops in the Capitol would be bad. Though I don't think that I don't think it materially affects like the Trump case specifically with the charges. And,
of course it does. It affects of what we're told.
Well, because he never.
It affects, like you could say, it doesn't affect the alternate electors thing, but it affects the perception that we've been told that January 6th was an insurrection, right? Because go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and you can shoot me down on this now if you want, but Trump still didn't call for the deployment of the National Guard.
Okay, what was Trump's advisors telling him?
Well, to call for the National Guard to be deployed,
that's
right?
not. That might have been what Mike Pence said, but the people that, would you agree with me that Mike Pence...
McCarthy said too, right?
Would you agree with me that McCarthy and Mike Pence don't know as much as, say, the lieutenant general that was the person that was allowed to give the thumbs up or down? When that guy says, no, don't do it, it would be bad for optics, you're saying Trump should have overrode him.
Wait, did he tell him that? On January 6th?
It doesn't matter if he told Trump specifically that. That's what Trump
does, though, right?
No, it doesn't, and let me tell you why, right? Because we don't expect presidents to have the minute details of entrusting security and setting up security. It's not like, Skyrim or something where you expect the president to have like one of those maps with like red and blue okay, we need security to come around the flank here, and then that's not what happened. He delegates that authority to professionals that are in charge of security. The professionals that were in charge of security, you had one begging the people he needed to over and over and over, can you please release the National Guard? Can you please do it? And they kept saying, no, it would look bad for optics. Those people were trying
so who was the one asking the National Guard to be deployed?
Stephen Sund, the Capital City Police Chief.
Okay. Well, and then Pelosi did too, right? But that was from New Jersey and Virginia, right?
That's not true. Pelosi's office, so here's how it works. Because the way the law is written, Stephen Sund does not have the ability to request the National Guard until he gets permission for one of three people. I forget who the third was, but two of them, and the ones that he had direct contact to, were the Sergeant-at-Arms of the Senate and of the House. The Sergeant-at-Arms under the Senate directly answered to Mitch McConnell. The Sergeant-at-Arms in the House directly answered to Nancy Pelosi. He asked, previous to January 6th, those groups, if he could have more National Guard people. He was told by Nancy Pelosi's Sergeant-at-Arms, we'll get back to that, we'll see. Then he went to Mitch McConnell's. As soon as he walked in and talked to I forget their names, I'm sorry, I don't have them in front of me. As soon as he walked into Mitch McConnell's guy, he said he found it odd that Mitch McConnell's guy immediately was like, I don't know, let's see if we can come up with a different plan. He barely got the words out of his mouth before he was getting shot down. Months later, after January 6th, he had dinner with that same Sergeant-at-Arms under Mitch McConnell. He said, just curious, when I showed up, how'd you already have an answer prepared? He said, because the Sergeant-at-Arms under Nancy Pelosi called me and said Nancy won't stand for it. Find some way to shut him down. So Nancy Pelosi, before January 6th, specifically told the people that would have ultimately been able to give the thumbs up down to the request of the National Guard, no. Then on the day of January 6th, Nancy Pelosi's Sergeant-at-Arms testified that the first time he got the call from Stephen Sund, he gave the go-ahead to request the National Guard. Stephen Sund says, that's a lie. I have the phone records that show that I called him 14 times.
Sund is saying that Pelosi lied or the Sergeant at Arms lied?
The Sergeant at Arms lied when he testified that the first time it was requested on the day of January 6th, he gave him. Sund has the records to show that that's not true. He called him 14 times and was denied 13 times until the 14th time. At that point, once it was accepted, it was once they'd already got to the steps of the Capitol and began the breach, which is exactly the narrative that the Democrats wanted. Only then did they say, okay, now we can stop this. But up until then, the person that answered directly to Nancy Pelosi, who made sure that the National Guard wasn't deployed before January 6th, continued to make sure that they weren't deployed on January 6th. Then Stephen Sund was able to make the phone call that he needed to make to a host of people, including Muriel Bowser was on the line, and I forget the name of the lieutenant general from the Army that answered directly to the CIA that he needed to get the thumbs up. He desperately requests the National Guard, and the lieutenant general says, nah, I don't think it would look good for optics. So this is the narrative that we're supposed to believe. These career military and security professionals thought that there was a coup about to overthrow the United States government, but decided preventing it would optically look bad, so they allowed it to occur. And what I'm told is, don't look at any of that. There's nothing to see there. Instead, solely blame Donald Trump because he should have overruled the wishes.
Well, he didn't overrule them though, because he never talked to them to begin with.
Why would he? You would assume the people you've delegated.
Well, because he was watching it on television.
So,
so you don't think that he's watching the coup on television?
Was Nancy Pelosi watching it? Was Nancy Pelosi watching it? Was her surgeon?
She was living it, right?
So was McCarthy. Was her sergeant at arms?
Who called Trump and told him?
Was her sergeant at arms?
Well, presumably they were there.
He kept telling Stephen Sund, I have to run it up the chain. Up the chain was to Nancy Pelosi. So if Nancy Pelosi,
Pelosi did call the National Guard, though, right? She called Governor Northam and Larry Hogan, right?
After 2:00, once it had been going on for hours, right? So for 2 hours, the sergeant at arms under Nancy Pelosi kept saying, I have to talk to my boss, who's Nancy Pelosi. And for 2 hours, he kept saying, nah, we can't do it. I got to talk to my boss. Now, you admit that Nancy Pelosi was living the coup. So for some reason, either the sergeant at arms or Nancy Pelosi watched the coup happen live and were like, nah, we're not going to send the National Guard. Then a lieutenant general who's a military person also watched the coup happen live for hours and said, nah, we're not going to deploy the National Guard. And you have no question there. There's no question of, wait a minute, why did they allow this coup to occur? But what we're told is Trump should have went outside of them. He should have not relied to the people that he tasked with security and said, I will make the unilateral decision myself. And you know what we would be talking about?
Well, I mean, yeah, because he's the president of the United States.
That's bullshit. That's bullshit. Yeah. Okay, would you say the same about Benghazi? Did you say the same? Regardless,
I don't know enough of the details about Benghazi.
I just want to be clear. Anytime a military action goes wrong or a security action goes wrong, you say the president should have intervened and know that he shouldn't have trusted his generals.
Well, they were there because he sent them there. They were his crowd.
What does that matter? What's that have to do with anything? He told them to be peaceful.
He wanted them to. Yeah, he did say peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
That's right.
I don't think that really matters, though. I think that his intentions were very clear.
It's his actual work. What were his intentions?
Well, I think his intentions were to delay the certification of the vote so that he could remain president, and so that Mike Pence would overthrow out the election. So do you think Mike Pence didn't have enough time to make up his mind? That's what Trump thought? I think Mike Pence did make up his mind. Mike Pence decided that President Trump was acting in an illegal manner and that he wouldn't go along with it.
All right.
And that's what he told the president.
So then how would the delay have helped? Do you think in Trump's head he was like, oh, well, if I just force Mike Pence to have 40 more minutes to think about it, then he'll change his mind?
I don't know. I can't say why he's
right. That's odd. So we don't look at.
But he didn't call off the mob either, even though he was specifically told.
He did tell them. He did. So he
well, told them eventually, right?
So when you look at the timeline, it turns out that there wasn't much violence actually at all that occurred until people started to breach, particularly a specific tunnel. In fact, the most amount of violence you could see is things like people pushing signs at cops and things like that.
Well, no, they broke through the barricades during the speech, even at the ellipse, right?
That's not necessarily active violence, just going through barricades. If that's the case,
well, they knocked out one of the officers.
Who?
What's her name? The woman who testified.
The
female officer.
Let's say that's true. That a officer got knocked out. Would you say that that's enough to declare something a riot or a coup? One officer being knocked out? Because what I'm telling you is if you look at the actual footage that day, the actual amounts of violence was pretty benign compared to what we see with most political protests that the police are involved with. And what we saw we actually saw rubber bullets and tear gas being shot from police into an almost entirely peaceful crowd as a precursor to when things started to get violent. So imagine that we had the pro-Palestinian protesters, particularly on college campuses that we've seen, most of which I'll say, even if they were trespassing, destroying property, etc., most of them I think it's being blown out of proportion. I don't fucking like these people, let's be clear, but I think it's being blown out of proportion at how violent they've been. I don't think they've been particularly violent. But let's say we replace that situation with how the cops acted and all of a sudden just started fucking maliciously shooting rubber bullets and tear gas right in their faces. How do you think that would end?
It was Caroline Edwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
What time did she get hit?
I don't remember. I think she was on the bike rack line though, but I don't know what exactly. I think she was one of the very first.
Okay.
I believe, but again, don't just.
I'm not saying there wasn't any acts of violence. I'm not, but that's different than saying like I don't think.
But that was during the speech though.
Okay.
Well, she might have been knocked out like slightly after the speech, I guess.
Okay, but your argument is Trump should have spoke up because he saw what was happening, and now you're like it happened during the speech or right after, which presumably Trump wouldn't have directly seen.
Well, he didn't. Trump didn't find out specifically about the violence until he returned to the Capitol itself, and he was informed at. I'll probably pull up the exact time stamp here. Okay, so after the ellipse, Trump wanted to go to the Capitol originally, right? He wanted to go there with his supporters, but the Secret Service wouldn't let him.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it's when he returned to the Capitol, the White House photographer. When was the photograph taken? Remember the last photograph that day of Trump from the White House photographer? It was that photograph is when he found out upon returning to the Capitol.
Okay. All right. What do you know what time that is? The general idea?
No, it was. Yeah, no, I don't. Sorry.
So he tweeted it. What's fucking military time? Here we go. 19 minus 5 is 14. So he tweeted at 2:38. Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They're truly on the side of the country. Stay peaceful. Then roughly a half hour.
He knew. Yeah, he knew. That was after he knew already.
So how long did he know?
35 minutes. I wrote that down at least. 35. So 35 minutes he asked. I'm asking everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful.
Okay, so
no
35
violence,
minutes after he was first made aware of violence, he tweeted out and asked people to be peaceful.
Yeah.
Okay, and your argument...
Well, to remain peaceful, right, after he knew that they weren't. And he was informed by his staff, because several of his staffers have testified that they didn't think that was adequate.
I'll tell you this. This is what I'm 99%... I don't know you very well, but I'm 99% certain this is what would be happening. If Trump would have deployed the National Guard, right, and something bad would have happened, what you would have heard was a massive Democratic media campaign that you would have parroted, that would have said Trump is a tyrant. He tried to utilize the National Guard in a coup to maintain power. He was the people around him before January 6th and people in charge of security on January 6th knew that it would be a terrible idea to deploy the National Guard. Trump refused to take their advice and went outside the scope. He has no knowledge of being a security professional, and yet he wanted the signal clearly when all of these people were saying, don't deploy the Guard, it'll be bad for optics, and Trump went over their heads and deployed them. The signal to the National Guard, it doesn't matter the words he said, the signal to the Guard was, you are my Praetorian Guard. Keep me in power.
No, it would depend on what he exactly ordered them to do. But
that is exactly what the narrative would have been. Exactly.
Maybe some people would have said that. That's not how I would have approached it.
I guarantee you would have, because that's what CNN would have said. That's what the New York Times would have said. That's what Democrats would have been saying for the past 4 years. That's what they would have been saying. That's what they were saying before. If Trump would have deployed the National Guard before January 6th, would you have said that was him?
No,
being authoritarian?
No, not necessarily. No, it would depend on what he deploys them to do, right?
What does that mean?
Like if he deployed them to take over the Capitol, then obviously
how would we know?
Guard the Capitol.
Let me ask you this: how would we know what his intent was to what he meant when he deployed them? How would we know?
Well, we can't read his mind, right? But we'd be able to determine based on the actions he took on that day. Yes.
How so?
In the lead up to that day.
How so?
Well, because what are the Guards people doing, right? Are they there to protect the Capitol, or are they there to
they
to
were
arrest
clearly
Pelosi?
so he suggested having them there to protect people at the Capitol, and they said, "Oh, this is him."
Well, he didn't do that, to be clear.
Well, it's part of what he said. He wanted it to remain peaceful. He was afraid prior, happened over and over, that I'm sure people like you didn't speak up much about, that when we had right-wing protests or right-wing groups, what happened was the left would come and beat the shit out of them, like happened in Portland over and over. Then what happens is the right starts to fight back and the right gets arrested. And so he, like many others, thought there's going to be a lot of left-wing agitators that show up here, so I want an adequate security force to make sure shit doesn't get out of hand. They were told, no, that would be terrible for optics.
Well, no, he never requested that.
That's not true. He did.
No, so you're talking about no. That's actually so. You're talking about that's from the Loudermilk story.
It's
That's
not
actually
just the Loudermilk story, right? It's,
no, so or not Tony Ornato. So why don't you lay out what you think happened? Because I looked into this myself and I thought it was a lie.
Trump requested before January 6th, when he was in a meeting like the 4th or the 5th, he requested that National Guard troops be deployed because he was worried that there was going to be conflict between left-wing agitators and his supporters. He didn't officially... Go ahead.
What's your source for that? Just so...
I believe I read it in the Sun things. There were people that testified to the case that they heard that.
Well, no, so I think through the testimony you're talking about, like I think Tony Ornato testified that he overheard a conversation between what's his name? Was it Meadows? The Secretary of Staff?
Yeah, it's Chief of Staff.
Chief of Staff. So Meadows he said he overheard a conversation with Mark Meadows and was it the mayor? Was it Muriel Bowser?
Yes.
And that he overheard Meadows say, "Is everything in place? Do you need more guard or something like that?" Or I don't remember exactly what was said. We can probably just pull it up. But this.
So just like leading Nancy Pelosi's rejections, I could prove that, at least from this USA Today article, that she's full of shit. But for example,
I'll link you something too.
No record request. This is from the USA Today. A government memo about the events leading up to January 6th, statements from Pelosi's office and the Pentagon, and testimony from the former House Sergeant at Arms show that Trump did not request 10,000 troops ahead of the rally. Drew Hamill, Pelosi's spokesperson, told USA Today that Pelosi's office was not consulted or contacted regarding any request for the National Guard ahead of January 6th. And he noted the Speaker of the House does not have the power to reject that request. Well, that's a lie. Stephen Sund has it on record, the Capital City Police, that he directly requested. And that he was told specifically by the Sergeant at Arms under Mitch McConnell that it was Nancy Pelosi herself that said, no, we can't have the National Guard. So when Nancy Pelosi denies this and says, no, there was never any request, she's lying. That's a lie. And unless Sund's lying, who has documentation to back up his claims.
So Sund requested the Guard before the violence, I assume?
Sund requested the Guard.
Days in advance?
Yes.
Okay.
And Sund talks about other things. He says anytime there's a potential rally that's going to occur in places like D.C., they have these interagency meetings where they have like basically running through scenarios of how to protect the White House, how to protect the Capitol. In this time, it was incredibly laxed. In fact, he wasn't given the actual security. We see all these trials of the Proud Boys that say that there were inside sources that were telling the FBI that there was an impending coup, that they were going to attempt to overthrow the government, and that the FBI was aware about it. Yet they didn't share that information with any of the people tasked with defending the Capitol. They shared it with his intelligence, the person under him, I forget her name, and Go ahead.
Who specifically?
The woman that they shared it with?
Yeah. Or you can just link to me later if you have it, or we can talk about it with follow-up discussion if you don't have it. But I'll link you this too. This is the National Guard thing. This is why I was pretty certain that this was not true about the National Guard, but you can look it over at your own convenience. It's pretty long.
Yeah, the point I'm trying to make is what we're told. It's just nonsensical. It was a riot that got out of hand. We're told that Trump should not have trusted the people he tasked with security, that he should have went outside that and said, no, I have the ultimate authority, even though we were told by everyone that looked into this that it would be bad for optics for Trump to declare this, but Trump should have, without consulting them and against their wishes, go ahead and deployed it. But we can't question why the people who actually know about security were rejecting it while simultaneously saying it was a coup. Can you give me any good reason, and other than pure ignorance? And we're assuming these people aren't purely ignorant because their career is, it's not like me or you. Like, I couldn't tell you the first fucking thing about protecting a building. Like, I don't know, right? So you could say, yeah, I could see how Rob would make that mistake because he's a fucking idiot. He doesn't know anything. But Sergeant at Arms, Lieutenant General, they know about this stuff. Can you give me any reason that they had these two beliefs simultaneously? Oh my God, there's a coup occurring that might overthrow the government, but let's not deploy the National Guard because it'll look bad for optics. Can you give me any reason?
Are you saying that did they make that decision before though? Because you said that Sun made the requests prior to the violence.
There's two instances going on. There is prior to January 6th, right? And we can talk about that. I would
say that there's no reason. I would say so.
No. But that's not what I'm asking you. I'm saying on the day of January 6th, you already said everybody's watching the TV or they're living it. They see that this coup's going on. That's the language they've used since then as well. Oh my God, an attempt to overthrow the government. They see that, and then they have the guy who's charged with defense going, my God, deploy the National Guard. And they go, nah. Can you
Well, I
explain
think
it?
because they had a reasonable concern that it would look bad to have troops in the Capitol.
So your argument is they simultaneously believed a coup was occurring that could overthrow the government, but thought that the optics of how bad it would look on camera to have the troops there outweighed preventing the coup. That's your argument.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, I think there were different competing actors who had different like ideas of that, right? Like, so like,
That doesn't pass the smell test. That doesn't.
What do you mean? Because Pelosi did call the National Guard. I don't have the exact time. You said it was 2 p.m. You said it was 2 p.m.
That's when the Sergeant at Arms finally gave the go-ahead.
No. When she called,
I have no idea. What I do know is this: according to Stephen Son, the Sergeant at Arms then answers directly to Nancy Pelosi, kept telling him over and over, "I have to run it up the chain of command." The only person ahead of him on the chain of command was Nancy Pelosi. He was repeatedly denied until around, I believe, 2 p.m. At that point, things had already gotten out of hand. So unless you're saying, and I don't believe this is the case, I'm pretty sure that the much ballyhooed call by Nancy Pelosi was after that point. And so what I'm telling you is
it could have been. I don't know the exact time.
The entire point was that this was set up from the get-go to intentionally get out of hand so that it could be used as a narrative by Democrats and establishment people to say, see, Trump is a threat to democracy, he must be removed. The same people that had no problem with the actual threat to democracy that actually impeded the duly elected president and his agenda when they used the FBI to illegally target him for 4 years. Same people. Didn't have much to say about the illegal weaponization of the FBI by the Democratic Party, and then all of a sudden, mysterious. And I'm sorry, people could have differences of opinions. I think that anyone who's looking at this remotely objectively, if you took the name Trump out of it, if you took the name Pelosi, if you took the name Biden, and you just put it in a fictional country or a country that people don't know much about, and you said, so these dudes that were tasked with protecting is their number one goal, protecting the government, they're looking there and going, this is unprecedented in our country. My God, the enemies are.
Well, it is unprecedented.
The enemies are.
I didn't get the last word in, but
the enemies are at the gate. They're about to overthrow the government. We have the ability to stop them, but it would look bad if we stopped them. So we're not going to do it. That doesn't pass the smell test.
I would say
that is absurd.
Well, I would say that the mob was more or less under control by the Capitol Police by the time that they
by 2:00.
Well, again, 2:00. I don't remember the exact times.
That's when Stephen Son says he was finally given the okay. Like 1:55 or something like that. He was given the okay by the Sergeant at Arms to request the National Guard. You think it was under control by then?
By 2:00 when they get permission? I don't know. I'd have to look at the exact times.
Okay, but again, you seem to be quite certain that when Trump got back, he was looking in real time at violence. He
was, because he was watching it on television.
What time was that?
Informed by his staff.
What time was that?
So it's 35 minutes after he learned about the Capitol being breached, just when he made that tweet. We went over that. And then an hour and 4 minutes later, 3 hours after being informed of the attack, he made the Rose Garden video.
But that doesn't give me
he released the Rose Garden video.
That doesn't give me the time.
Well, when did the attack start exactly? Because it was 3 hours after.
I don't know.
Roughly.
I don't know. It depends.
But he made the Rose Garden video, according to my note, roughly 3 hours after being informed. Is when he told them to go home.
That doesn't help me, right? Because what you're making a very Goldilocks type time frame. You're saying at 2:00 when they finally gave the okay to send the National Guard. Well,
I didn't say 2.
Okay, well that's when the okay was finally given to send the request up the chain by Nancy Pelosi, Sergeant at Arms. You're like, well, whenever that was, things were probably dealt with by that point.
Well, that would be my assumption. Because the attack did fail, right? And they didn't. The National Guard, they lost because the Trump people went home, right? His supporters, they went home because he told them to. It was a 3 hour mark.
Again,
it wasn't the National Guard that stopped them.
Again, I don't think you're getting the. We're having a discussion on how people could say there is a coup about to overthrow the government. We have the ability to stop it, but we're not going to because we think it would look bad for optics. How does those two beliefs make sense?
I think that the military
and your answer was, well, at that point, probably because the National Guard wasn't needed because things had been taken care of. That call was.
And they'd already been.
That call was at 1:55. And so I say, no, wait a minute. You seem to suggest that the reason Trump's culpable is because once he got back to the White House, in real time, the violence was rampant. Now, if he got back to the White House around 2 o'clock, say, which is around the same time this call was occurring, then your statements seem to be in grotesque conflict with each other. On one hand, we didn't need the National Guard because things were taken care of, but on the other hand, Trump was witnessing a coup in real time, simultaneously at the same time. It seems it seems like you're playing fast and loose with the timeline.
Well, I think there's just different actors who have different. Again, I don't know about the Sun stuff specifically. I can't comment on that. But I think the military, I think that they're deeply concerned about being perceived as being political and interfering with the political process. They are deeply concerned about optics.
So.
What? So right, because like that's their motive, right?
Okay, so just to be clear, then,
to be politically
so
motivated.
Just to be clear, then we would expect similar amounts of military people to push back afterwards when the National Guard was deployed to D.C.
Maybe it would depend. I don't know.
But that didn't happen.
Like an alternate reality. We don't know how that would have played out.
It's just, I mean, I can't believe, you seem reasonable in many things. I can't believe that you could believe that. I mean, again, you're saying it was a coup. The military people are saying it's a coup, that there was literally a danger of our entire country being overthrown by violent people who make.
Again, I think it's a lazy coup, right? It's the kind of coup I'd expect Trump to grit.
Do you think one of the reasons Trump should have acted was because there was a reasonable expectation that mob could have hurt senators?
Members of Congress, yes.
Okay, so in other words, you would believe,
and the vice president.
So you would believe that the sergeant at arms, the Capital City Police Chief, the lieutenant generals that were all tasked with defense and looking at this would have came to the same conclusion as you.
I'm not sure that they didn't, right?
Okay, well they say that they came to that conclusion, that they thought it was a coup. That's what they say. That's what all of them have said. And yet, simultaneously, while they think that this mob may go in, overthrow the government, harm members of Congress, they're like, nah, we can't stop them because it would look bad.
Again, it depends on who specifically, right?
Okay, Lieutenant General, Sergeant at Arms.
Well, I don't know about the Sergeant at Arms. So the Sergeant at Arms and Lieutenant General are two different people, right? They might have different ideas and different motives.
I don't understand. So I just want to be clear. Your argument is that our military reasonably would have the interest of looking bad ahead of preventing the assassination of members of Congress and stopping the overthrow of our government. No,
that's not super unreasonable.
It is incredibly unreasonable.
Trump could have ordered them at any point, though, right? He didn't.
So they could have ordered.
He could have also called the mob off. Why didn't he just call them off?
He did at 2:30. He told them to be peaceful.
Well, so he called them off 3 hours later, though.
So, if Trump's
you don't think that's weird? That he's watching it on television?
No, I don't think.
He's using the opportunity to call. He's using the opportunity. Sorry, Rudy Giuliani is using the opportunity to call members of Congress to try to get them to not throw out the vote, and then he's telling McCarthy, right? He's telling McCarthy that it was Antifa supporters going after him.
Yep.
Don't think that's a little bit weird? And he's telling, this was before, but he told Mike Pence that he's too honest. Like, what does this mean? Why did he tell him that?
What's that? What is saying Mike Pence? Let's go by these one by one.
If Trump thought that he was the honest one and won.
I'll tell you what I think.
This is what I think.
I think Donald Trump thinks that he lost the election. I think that's absolutely clear. I think that the day of January 6th, he saw this as one of the last-ditch opportunity to finally get his challenge heard, right? And he thought that the legal way to do that was to have an alternate slate of electors that would have caused a pause. This, for example, has happened previously. I believe in Hawaii this happened once, where there was a challenge to the election, and an alternate slate of electors was passed, and ultimately it was successful because it delayed then the certification until there was a recount. And it turned out that
was different, though.
Why?
Because that was a law that was within the laws of the United States, right? There were actually two competing slates, were there not in Hawaii? I don't know all the details.
Yeah, there were two competing slates, right?
Right, but those were lawful slates.
What makes them lawful as opposed to unlawful?
Well, it was certified by the wasn't it certified by the legislature, the Hawaii legislature,
no.
or the Secretary of State, or whoever it was?
I believe the recount finished before the official certification occurred. But
so they never recertified the new ones?
I think
ever?
I'm not exactly sure. It doesn't matter. The reason that
it does matter, right?
Why?
Because that would be the lawful process that you follow. Whereas, having
show me the
break
law.
into the Capitol at 3 a.m. or whatever. Because
remember
they did, right?
No one's suggesting. No one's suggesting that the act of breaking into the Capitol is what's lawful or unlawful. We're talking about the alternate slate of electors.
The fake electors broke into the building. So in some cases, not all cases.
What does that have anything to do? The question we have is this: we're talking about.
Well,
We're talking about at this moment.
representatives.
Donald Trump feels that the reason he's got these alternate slate of electors planned is that will cause an investigation into the elections that he thinks were things that were done fraudulently that stole the election from him. That's his belief. When he says, then, hey, Pence, first off, I think it's funny. I think it's very funny when Trump says things that are clear cut. You're like, I don't believe his words. If he says be peaceful, it's clear he didn't mean be peaceful. But when he says be honest, you have no problem then looking and saying, that means he's intuiting that he's dishonest, and therefore Pence is.
I'm just.
I'll tell you. What he was saying with be honest was that Mike Pence is the type of dude that's like, look, no, I'm going to go with the slate of electors that the time for challenges has ended. That's it. And Trump disagreed. It wasn't that Trump was saying you're too honest in the sense of why won't you lie to help me? He was saying you're too honest and that you're just too by the book. You're just, this is the way it's going to go. That's what he was saying. Now, Trump was dicking around probably all day with Rudy Giuliani and others trying to do everything they could because they thought this was the last effort to have any sort of legal challenge to the election. And he probably thought that, like most of the times, that his supporters were generally mostly peaceful. And if there was some sort of violence, it wasn't that bad, considering we'd just seen a summer of violence over and over, including an attack on the White House, which Democrats seem to think was perfectly fine and reasonable. It's just part of the democratic process. That's what they thought. And so he probably thought, not my place. We have people tasked with security. They'll deal what's needed. Then he kept getting harangued, so he sends a tweet out. It's like, look, don't be violent. The police are on our side. Support the police. Then a half hour later, he sets another one out, right? Then at that point, the narrative, and you could see this from once it was clear that the narrative was going to become, this was an insurrection, this was a violent coup. Then at that point, he's like, I think this is a criticism you could make of Trump. I think ultimately the reason he spoke out about it was because of the optics of it. That's why he eventually is like, go home, because he realized, oh shit, this is going to be used to play again. And this is something you wouldn't know this as a left winger. As a right winger, it's something we have to know, that every opportunity for us to be labeled as violent during the protest process will be taken. There will be influence, just like the Gretchen Whitmer stuff, just like we're finding out that there were all sorts of agencies that had plants in the crowd of January 6th. They will do anything possible to smear us as violent. It's the exact opposite in the left. Even if there is actual violence, it's mostly peaceful. People sue when they're involved in riots. They sue the city of New York and they end up millionaires because they were unlawfully detained in the process of a riot. So that's what was going on. And what comes down to is what we're being suggested is that military and security professionals thought that there was an ongoing coup and prevented the National Guard from being deployed because they thought it was more important to not look bad than to stop the overthrow of the government. They're not to blame, but Trump is to blame because he should have went over their heads. And trust us, the very people that were so worried about optics then wouldn't have been concerned about optics had Trump did that. It's nonsense.
So I just want to understand your perspective on this.
Mm-hmm.
So the military and security professionals thought that there was an ongoing coup, but they were also worried about the optics. And the best evidence for this is that Pelosi, up the chain of command, right? Up the chain of command will be Pelosi. Did he actually say Pelosi, or did he just say up the chain of command?
He said up the chain of command, which, to be clear, Sun said there was only one person in the chain of command, and that was Pelosi.
So it would have to be Pelosi then?
Correct.
Okay, unless there was some reason to doubt the testimony or for some reason. But I'm not saying that there is.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. So military and security professionals thought there was an ongoing coup, but they were worried about the optics.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, they decided not to act until 2 o'clock.
No, let's be clear. They still didn't act at 2. There were several steps of this, right? Before Sun could contact the military, the National Guard, he had to get permission. So at around 1:55, he finally gets permission from Nancy Pelosi, Sergeant at Arms. Then he gets on a call at 2:37, which Lieutenant General Pyatt's on, Mario Bowser's on, and a bunch of other people. So I know this sounds crazy, but the first barrier is permission to request. The second barrier is to request. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So all this delay was just the permission to request. Then at 2:37, he actually gets to call the relevant people and request. No one speaks up except Lieutenant General Pyatt, who says at 2:37, I don't think we should deploy them. It would look bad for optics. Now, you may question the veracity of which side is telling the truth of what really happened, but know this: Sun presented as evidence not only people that agreed with him that were in the room that said that they heard his end of the call, but also the records of the phone calls themselves. So, for example, it can't be true that the sergeant-at-arms under Pelosi said that the first call was the call at 1:55 that granted him, and that Stephen Sun has a record of 14 calls that went out. If Sun has that record, that proves that the other guy's lying, correct?
So he has a record of 14 calls that
Correct.
went out, and who's lying then it proves. Sorry, I was trying to take notes too. And I was
If
a little bit
if the sergeant-at-arms says I was only called once, and the other guy says I made 14 calls, here's the records, which one's lying?
and he has the phone records.
Correct.
He actually shows them. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Probably he's lying. Yes.
Okay, why would you lie? If this is all innocent, why would you lie? Why would the sergeant-at-arms lie? If it was just we were really concerned about optics. We thought that there was a coup, but for some reason,
Well, I don't know if the Sergeant at Arms was concerned about optics. I know that the military. Again, I'm not seeing the latest testimony. I've only seen the very beginning of the latest testimony and read some articles about it. So I don't know all that happened within the latest National Guard testimony, other than what I read. And what I read was that they were concerned about the optics. But I think that was the military that was concerned, right? That was because one of the National Guard's people said that one of the you probably don't remember better than me, this specific part at least. Didn't one of the National Guard's people testify recently, like that one of the commission members or the Department of the Inspector General's report for the DoD that one of the people had misled the Inspector General.
I don't know. Say again.
Okay. That one of the military officials had misled the Inspector General.
There was an accusation.
But what was that? I didn't.
I don't remember the specific, but like I know you had you had all sorts of people, like a guy by the name of Matthews that was in the office spoke up and said that both Pyatt and Flynn were misleading when they said that they never said for optics they didn't want it deployed. The more important question is, okay, so you say, all right, fine, we have evidence that the military guy in the middle of a coup decided that optics was more important than preventing the coup. I already find that to be an astounding claim. And I don't understand how that's not the biggest story in the country. But fine, let's broach from that. And you say, but we don't have proof that the reason that the Sergeant of Arms was not accepting the request was optics. Can you give me another argument as to what it may have been if it wasn't optics?
I think it was optics for them, if that's what they testified to, right?
Well, I don't know. You're claiming no. I don't know if they ever specifically said optics. It's clear that that's what Sun's implying.
Well, I think that's what the new Loudermilk testimony with the National
He even
Guard.
said, by the way, the Sergeant at Arms name's Paul Irving, right? So you're saying Loudermilk testified with the Sergeant?
Loudermilk is the representative who...
Right. The National Guard member testified that Paul Irving said optics? I don't think so. I thought he said that was coming from...
he said that it was a military member.
Correct.
It was someone within the DoD.
So you made the distinction, right? I said that there were two people. There was the denial of the permission to request, and then there was the denial of the request. And you said, well, the denial of the request was a military guy that was concerned with optics, but we don't know that's why the Sergeant of Arms denied the permission. And I said,
right. I sorry if I said that I misspoke. Then
okay.
I don't know. I don't know. So
I mean, again, I don't see to me, I don't see how in any world, let's say let me choose my words carefully here. It seems to beggar belief that there could be people that legitimately think that security professionals, and again, and the reason I say security professionals is, all I mean by that is, this isn't a McDonald's worker that doesn't know. This is military.
a member of the military.
This is members of the military. This is
They're loyal to the Constitution.
the Sergeant of Arms, whose core duty is protecting the Capitol. That's the number one duty of the Sergeant at Arms. They watch what you say is an ongoing coup, which you say is potentially harmful to members of Congress, this mob. They've testified as much, that they thought it was a coup. The entire Democrat narrative is it was blatantly a coup. In fact, that's why we criticized Donald Trump. He blatantly watched this.
Well, that's not the Democrat narrative, though, right? That's actually what happened.
Okay, fine. That's your interpretation. That's fine. Great, you make my case for me. So then I don't want you to wiggle out and say, well, maybe the Sergeant at Arms didn't think the threat was that severe. Maybe
I didn't know the Sergeant at Arms' name.
Paul
I don't know what Paul Irving. Yes.
Yeah. You're not going to weasel out. You just said that's the truth. It clearly was a coup. Okay, great. That helps my case even more. So they saw this occurring, and they have the guy that's tasked with security going, please let me get the National Guard. And they're like, nah, for optics. That's insane. That's insane that you believe that. But the question I have, if I operate in that world, that's somehow a possibility, the question I have to you is, if the Democrats are concerned about this insurrection, why wasn't there the immediate investigation and public lambasting of these officials who chose optics over preventing the violent overthrow of the United States government? Why wasn't that a big part of the January 6th narrative? The committee.
I don't know if there was this see, I'm not trying to necessarily buy though that there was this, because I have not looked at it myself yet, the Stephen Sund and Paul Irving, that there was a attempt to stop this. I do think that there was, if the latest testimony about for the National Guard people is true, I think that there might have been concern from the military specifically, but I don't know if I buy that you're. No offense.
Okay, no, that's fair. Two questions then. If I'm right that this is what Sund, I can send you the links if you want. If I'm right that that's what Sund testified to, right? Then what would your answer be if I am right?
If he testified, what specifically?
If it is true that he repeatedly called Paul Irving and was not given permission to request, right? If that's true, and Paul Irving lied about it and said, no, I gave the answer the first time. Now what's your answer?
Before, made the request during or before, just so we're clear. On January 6th or before?
We're only talking about the day of January 6th. So, yes, It is also true that Paul Irving denied the request previous to January 6th, but we're talking specifically on January 6th. Paul Irving sees a coup, violent, bloodthirsty, potentially killing members of Congress, potentially overthrowing the government. He sees it. He gets the call from the guy in charge of security. He says, please let me request the National Guard. He says, I got to run up the chain. Let me get it back to you. If that happened, I know you're saying I don't believe that happened. Fair enough. I
don't know if
that's
it happened.
fair. That's fair. If it did happen, now what's your answer?
I would have to learn why.
Okay, they're probably going to say optics. Now what's your answer? If they do say,
I don't know. It's a complicated thing because you don't want to have troops in the Capitol necessarily. It would be unprecedented.
So it's irrelevant. So the facts are. I don't even understand why you're arguing this point then, because your point because. Correct me if I'm wrong, and the audience could correct me if I'm wrong too. Maybe I'm misinterpreting it. You can tell me if I am. It seems that you keep making this distinction. And the distinction is, for the sergeant at arms to deny that request is one thing. But for the military guy to do it, well we sort of understand that because
it is different.
But wait, let me finish. For the military guy to do it, we understand because for a military guy, optics is important. But then when I press you and I'm like, okay, if I send you this evidence, right, about Paul Irving, right, what will you say then? And you're like, well, he's also concerned about optics. So it's the same argument.
Could be. I don't know. You said that would be like probably the reason, right?
Yeah. Well, all we know is that he's lied. That's all we know. So he didn't give an answer because he lied. And it doesn't seem the January 6th committee is that interested. Let me put it this way. Someone's lying. They're under oath. They're lying to the committee. One guy's saying, I called over and over and continue to be told, we got to wait. I got to run it up the chain of command. The other guy's saying, as soon as I was called, I gave it. That's a lie. Now, if we're really concerned to getting to the bottom of January 6th, you would admit that's something that needs to be hashed out.
I'm sure it would need to be investigated for sure.
Why didn't they?
Did they not?
They did not. In fact,
they never investigated the law enforcement's response.
That's correct. And Stephen Sund has said reportedly.
Well, no, they did though, right? There's a whole fucking section of the document.
Then show me the section. What's it say about that discrepancy?
Well, I've not read that far yet. So.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what it says about that discrepancy. Bupkis. Doesn't say anything. It doesn't say. We have two people that are literally saying the opposite thing. He repeatedly didn't give me permission, and the other saying, as soon as he asked, I gave permission. And they never said, this is the one we think was telling the truth. They just let it go. In fact, Stephen Sund said it was like pulling teeth to request that he even be allowed to come and testify in front of the committee. He still says, he's still going in front of committees talking about how shady this all is. So why didn't they get to the bottom of it? And it's frustrating, right? Because I think you're a reasonable person, right? I'm enjoying this conversation thoroughly. I don't know if you can tell, but I like someone who actually looked into like the specific details and stuff like that. But what frustrates me is oftentimes this is what happens. You get to the end, right? And it's like, okay, so these security professionals think there's about to be an overthrow of the government, and they're like, yeah, we're not going to stop it because of optics. And I think that like 99.9% of any attempted objective person in the world would say, that's fucked up. That doesn't make any sense. That's bullshit.